everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about all of my 5-star reads. So these are all of the books that I have rated 5 stars, in no particular order. So starting with the series where not every single book got 5 stars, we have the Land of Elian series by Carmen. This is a childhood favorite of mine, and all of the 3 in the original trilogy are 5 stars for me. But then there were 2 add-on books that did not get 5 stars. I have not read these for many years, so I don't know if all of the original trilogy or even the first one would be 5-star reads for me now as an adult, but they certainly were for me as a kid. Next we have the Ugly series, which once again, the original 3 for me are all 5-star reads, and they definitely still would be nowadays. I still love these so much. It's my favorite dystopian series. It's so action-packed. I love it. But then there was a 4th add-on book that I didn't love as much, was not a 5-star read. And now he has a new series, Imposters, in which the first book for me was 5 stars, and then the second book was more like 3 stars, and then the third book in the series, Mirror's Edge here, I have not read yet, so we shall see. Next I have the first book and the third book in the 3 Dark Crowns series by Kendar Blake. I loved this first book so much. It's a fantasy series and it's just very atmospheric, and it's got a very dramatic concept in which on this magical island, every generation a set of triplet girls are born to the queen, and when they come of age they have to fight to the death to become the new queen. So I really loved this first book, and then the second book took a pretty big nosedive. I was really disappointed by it. But then the third book really brought it back, and it was back up to 5 stars for me. And then the whole series ended with the 4th book, which was kind of just middle of the road for me. But this first and this third one I really loved. Next we have Princess Academy, which in my mind, I don't even consider this to be a series. For a long time there was just 1 book, and then later down the road she added a 2nd and a 3rd, and even more many years down the road I finally read the 2nd one, and it was so bad I did not continue to the 3rd. I immediately got rid of the 2nd one, erased it from my memory, and choose to believe that there's just 1 book in this series because I love this one so much. It is a major childhood favorite. 5 stars all the way. Next we have the first book in the Inkheart series by Cornelia Funk. These ones I did read them all like as they came out, unlike with Princess Academy, but still the first book was just so much better than the 2nd and the 3rd. So this first one is a childhood favorite, and the 2nd and the 3rd have been around since childhood for me, but I just have never loved them as much as the first. We have The Knife of Never Letting Go by Ness, which is the first book in the Chaos Walking trilogy, and again I was just really blown away by this first one, and the second one was just a lot slower. This one's very fast-paced. The main characters are on the run, so it's very action-packed, and again it just had this really interesting concept that then by the 2nd book just didn't feel as fresh and new anymore. And then the 3rd book, the way the series wrapped up, was just not quite what I was hoping. So the next one for me is Downsiders by Neal Schusterman, which Neal Schusterman is really well known for his Scythe series, but this is the first book that I read by him, and I read it when I was pretty young, and so this is kind of a childhood favorite for me. And it is about these people that are living under New York and what happens when they kind of interact with the people who live topside. Next I have Mystic River by Dennis Lehane, and this one is just so well written. The way that all of the pieces of the story come together are so good. It is a murder mystery, but it's really about these 3 guys, something that happened to them when they were kids, and the way it kind of comes back to haunt them in adulthood. After that I have The Green Mile by Stephen King, which is another kind of a mystery. Much like Mystic River, it's one where I really enjoy the movie a whole lot as well. This is by far my favorite Stephen King novel. Again, a 5-star read for me. Next, I have A Man Called Uva, which is a somewhat recent 5-star read for me. I read this just a few years ago, and then I just this year reread it, and I still love it so much. Uva is just so lovable in his old curmudgeonly ways, and it's just a really heartfelt story about an old man learning to let people in. Next, another childhood favorite is Holes by Louis Saccar. I actually read this one for school, although I think I had maybe read it before it was assigned in school. I certainly saw the movie early on, so this is one that has been in my life a long time and will always hold a special place in my heart. Next, I have The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak, which this is one that my mom recommended. It really kind of got me into historical fiction. It is a World War II historical fiction narrated by death, so again, it had that really interesting concept to pull me in, and then it's just a real heartfelt story. Next, I have one of my all-time favorites. It's in my top 10 favorite books of all time. It is a childhood favorite, and that is The Last Book in the Universe by Rodman Philbrick. This is a dystopian novel. It is the first dystopian that I ever read. It's my favorite dystopian standalone, and yeah, this is my second favorite book of all time, so clearly 5 stars. Next, we have the entire Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins. Everybody knows about these books. Again, it's a dystopian. That's one of my top genres, and these ones are just so well done, so much social commentary in them, and they're real classics among YA dystopia. Next, I have The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This is the book that really got me into contemporary YA. I, again, love this book so much. Obviously, I love all of these books because they're my 5-star reads. This is my 3rd favorite book of all time, and again, I think this is one that everyone knows about. Next, another John Green book is An Abundance of Catherines. I really love John Green's writing. These are the 2 for me that get into that 5-star category. This one is just so funny, kind of the complete opposite of The Fault in Our Stars, a much lighter read. The Fault in Our Stars is quite sad, of course, but this one just brings all the comedy, which I'm not usually one to laugh out loud at books. I only have a few on my shelves that I really think of as being like super funny to me, and this is definitely one of them. Next, I have The Entire Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. This is another childhood classic. This was one of my big fantasy series as a child, probably my 2nd favorite fantasy series of all time. I just reread these last year, and I had such a good time with that. It had been so long, and so yes, I'm always happy to revisit the land of Allegasia. Next, I have a few Peter Pan spin-offs in a row. What can I say? Love a good Peter Pan spin-off. So the first one I have is Peter and the Starcatchers. This one did have a lot of series drop off, but the first one was definitely a 5-star read for me. It is kind of an origin story for Peter and Neverland, and it is so interesting what these authors came up with to be like kind of the origin of some of the stuff that we know and love about Peter Pan. Next, I have Tiger Lily by Jodi Lynn Anderson, which this is a standalone, and the writing is just so beautiful, like almost lyrical. I love all the characters in the story so much. It's got a very different vibe from most Peter Pan stories. It's a little bit older, more of a older YA rather than like a younger YA or even a children's story, which is what a lot of Peter Pan stories are. So a very unique read and 5 stars for sure. And then finally, among the Peter Pan retellings, I have Fairy Dust and The Quest for the Egg, which these books just have the most beautiful artwork, which is honestly part of the 5-star rating. The first book for me is 5 stars, and then the second book is more like 4, and then the third book is more like 3 stars. But yeah, again, just love a good Peter Pan retelling. Peter Pan itself is not a 5-star read for me, but a lot of the retellings are. Next, I have Kids of Appetite by David Arnold, which this is another contemporary YA, and I think a lot of the draw on this one for me is that it's very much like a found family story, which is one of my favorite tropes. And so again, I love the characters so much. They're all so lovable, and it's so nice to see them like find each other and kind of become this found family. But another interesting element of this book is it's like a just pretty kind of typical contemporary YA in a lot of ways, but then there's also this kind of a mystery built in, because at the beginning of like each part of the book, some of the characters are being interviewed by the police about a murder. And so you're wondering how this very typical YA book becomes a murder mystery. And I also just really love David Arnold's writing style in this book. Next, I have Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. And this is one that I just connect with deeply in my soul, because the main character, it basically feels like I'm reading about myself. I've mentioned this a lot about this book, but me and the main character are very similar personality-wise as far as our shyness goes. And then also we're from the same place, and we go to the same school, or went rather. But it's also just a really enjoyable read. I love Rainbow Rowell's writing style. I feel like it's somewhat similar to John Green and David Arnold. It is a writing style that I connect with. Next, I have another Rainbow Rowell, and that is Attachments. And this is another one that can make me laugh out loud. It is so funny. This is actually an adult novel, but to me it still reads very much similar to her YA novels. So once again, it's still just got that writing style and that tone that I enjoy. Next, I have another childhood fave, and that is The Prophecy of the Stones by Flavio Boujour, which this is not a super well-known book, and it was actually written by a 13-year-old, and so there are places where you can kind of tell that it was a younger author, but since I read it as a kid, that definitely did not bother me as a kid, and so for that reason it's a childhood classic and kind of just holds a special place in my heart. But it is a fantasy novel about 3 girls who must save fairy tale land, and it's got a lot of kind of unique fairy tale creatures that you don't find in other fantasy novels, so that's always a fun element too. Next, I have one of the most recent 5-star reads on this list. I read this one for the first time last year. I think it was my only new 5-star read of the year last year, so it might literally be my newest 5-star read, because I don't know if I rated any of my new reads this year 5 stars or not. I kind of, looking at my books right now that I have here, I don't think any of these were ones that I read this year. But anyways, that book is The First Girl Child by Amy Harmon. This was just a really interesting new fantasy read for me. It's another one that takes place on an island. I really like fantasy reads that are on islands, I think. And again, it just had a very specific mood and tone to it that was very different than Three Dark Crowns, but it kind of reminded me of that in its uniqueness of tone, I guess. Next, getting to the end here, I have Holding Up the Universe by Jennifer Niven. Again, this kind of falls in that kind of John Green, Rainbow Rowell, David Arnold kind of contemporary YA category for me. Very similar tonally to those 3 authors. And so again, I just really enjoy the writing style on this one. I've read this one by Jennifer Niven, and then also All the Bright Places, which was not a 5-star, but I still did really like. And then I have another Jennifer Niven that I'm hoping to read this year, so kind of an author that is on the rise for me. Next, I have Afterworlds by Scott Westerfeld. This one really wins it on the concept. It is about a girl who is getting her first novel published and is moving to New York to do that, and it is told in alternating chapters. So one set of chapters is the author who is getting her book published, and the other set of chapters are the book that she wrote. So just such a cool concept. The book that she wrote is a fantasy book, and so this Afterworlds is kind of half contemporary YA with our main character's story who's getting a book published, but also half fantasy because the book that she's publishing is a fantasy book, and that's the other chapters. So this concept never ceases to make me happy to think about. And then also it's Scott Westerfeld. I love his writing style. Again, Uglies is one of my favorite series of all time, so I enjoyed this one a whole lot too. Next we have the Harry Potter series. This is my favorite series of all time. It is the series that got me into reading. Childhood classic for sure. Every single book in this series is 5 stars for me. I just love this story so much. And finally, we have Hamilton the Revolution by Lin-Manuel Miranda and Jeremy Mccarter. I love Hamilton the show. It is one of my favorite pieces of art of all time. And this is really just the script with like special features, with like behind the scenes info, which I love some good behind the scenes info on anything. And so of course this was just an obvious 5 stars for me. So yeah, this was all of my 5-star reads. I cannot hold them all up, so this is some of them. All of the books that I love the most. Let me know down below some of your 5-star reads. Have you had any new 5-star reads this year? Thanks for watching. Remember, words matter.